Hey folks, this is Linda Shenton Matchett, and for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, I am a Christian author and I write historical mystery and romance, primarily set during the World War II time period. And every Thursday evening around this time, and forgive me for being late, technology was not cooperating. I typically use my telephone, my cell phone to do this, and I could not get it to connect to Facebook. So then at the last minute, I had to scramble and grab my laptop. So as you can see, it looks a little bit grainy, and the lighting is not too great. But like I said, I had to kind of go last minute to my laptop and rearrange my setup. So enough of that. Tonight, what we're going to talk about is plane spotting. And pardon me while I refer to my notes periodically. Officially known as the Aircraft Warning System, which probably nobody would get on a multiple choice test, but that's what it was officially called. It was actually a civilian service. It was not part of the government, excuse me, not the government, but the military at all. It was strictly part of a civilian organization, although it was called the Army Ground Observer Corps. So a little bit confusing. And basically it was in order to watch for enemy planes during the war. There was a lot of fear and concern that since the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor, that they could go ahead and attack the West Coast and continue to invade from the West. And there was also concern that the Germans would get us from the East. So there were a lot of plane spotters. The reason for those concerns is that in between the two world wars, technology had improved, which allowed airplanes to have further range, and they were able to travel farther from home carrying high explosives. And so that was a legitimate concern. So because we really didn't have radar at the beginning of the war, that was a very in its very rudimentary stages and not being used except under very secret conditions and not very widely used from what I can understand. So basically there were mechanical detectors and they were not very adequate at all. So a system was put in place to use civilians because the government and the military felt that if they took soldiers and sailors to do these jobs, they would be pulled from other, for lack of a better word, legitimate operations, military operations. So it was decided to use civilians. And so they did use volunteers. Many who volunteered were from the American Legion. And so those were certainly veterans from prior wars. And so it was organized in May of 1941, interestingly enough. Which was before Pearl Harbor, but once Pearl Harbor had happened, the system went through some major changes and heavy recruiting to get thousands and thousands of folks to do it. All told, by the end of the war, there were about 1.5 million volunteers who were plane spotters. So the folks received very extensive training. And I promised you some artifacts. So here is the most recent addition to my collection is the Warplane Spotters Manual. And as you see, this is part A. And so the reason for that is it covered certain aircraft. So as you can see in the index, we have U.S. planes, which are the Boeing Flying Fortress, Consolidated Liberator and Catalina, the Curtiss Warhawk, the Grumman Wildcat, the Douglas Skytrain, Lockheed Lightning, North American Mustang, so quite a few. And then Great Britain, you had the Defiant, the Beaufort, the Blenheim, Bombay, Harrow, Hurricane, Wellington, Spitfire. And then Russia, there were several planes. France, there were a couple. There were several from Germany. We have the Dornier, the Focke-Wulf Condor, and the Courier, a couple of Henkels, and 3 different Junkers, and then a Messerschmitt. So very serious about the German airplanes, then Italian planes as well, and then several Mitsubishi Japanese airplanes. So it talks about the foreword in the book says, the present war has brought to the attention of all of us, civilian and servicemen alike, the importance of air power. The great bombing raids, the feats of fighter planes, which are publicized in newspapers and magazines, have made even the most earthbound of us keenly aware of the role of aviation. And it goes on and talks about that people with everyday observation skills could do this job. And so each page, as you see, has the different characteristics. So they've got the top-down look. Got to figure out how to do this on my laptop. I'm used to holding up in front of my camera on the phone. And then, as you can see, then they've got over here is the silhouette. And then, as you can see down here, they've got it as well. And then they have very specific information about which plane. This one is a Russian USSR-L-760, large all-metal long-range monoplane capable of carrying more than 60 persons. Talks about the length, the height, the weight, 90,000 pounds. And that it can fly as high as 23,800 feet. And then gives several descriptors. The wing is low type, swept back and tapered to rounded tips, 6 engines, sharp dihedral from roots, whatever that is. Apparently I would have to go through the training to figure that out. Engines are inline, air-cooled type with beard radiators and pointed spinners. So again, this particular book has 62 pages and lists a couple of dozen different airplanes. And so this was part of the training that was done. What was interesting, it became a very significant hobby. And also, again, you had folks who did it as a regular volunteer job. But it actually spawned quite a bit of books and publications, as well as flashcards. And this is also something that I just got, very excited. This is a reproduction set of airplane spotter cards. So let's see. So as you can see, it's a regular deck of cards. But then on each of the different playing cards, you have a different airplane. So this is a U.S. bomber. It's a B-25 Mitchell. And then on the back is a poster. It says, we've got the Axis. We've got the Axis number now, B-29. So, yeah, so it has the same poster. So these spotter playing cards were very, very popular. Everybody had at least one set in the house. And what was interesting is communities would put on, like, instead of a spelling bee or a geography bee, they would have plane spotting bees. And they would use their flashcards and their spotter manuals and see how quickly that folks could actually identify. So as the war escalated, thousands upon thousands of observation posts were established on the East Coast from the top of Maine all the way down to the bottom of Florida. And it went as far inland as about the Appalachian Mountains. And then on the West Coast, it went all the way through the entire coast, all the way from Washington down to the bottom of California. So each post had its own code and number. And what would happen is when the aircraft was spotted, the volunteer would record the information. So was it a US B-25? What time was it? What direction was it headed? And then what would happen is as the airplane passed each observation post, that post would phone in the information. And so the plane could be tracked as it made its way across the United States. And so they would reasonably be able to triangulate the position, the speed, the direction, and the altitude. So everyone from high school students to grandparents did this. and it was round the clock. It was daytime and nighttime as well. And most spotters worked in pairs, and they worked 2 to 4 hour shifts. So you were not expected to sit in the dark for 12 hours at a time. So it was short shifts. And then, as I said, it was relayed by telephone to the Army Information Center. Quoting from a memory of Bob Griggs, he says, "I recall one session when I accompanied my father to the Stillman Hill observation post, and I will never forget. It was a clear day and not much was happening. Suddenly, a growl of multiple engines was heard coming from the east. Next, a low-flying large aircraft seemed to emerge from the tops of the forest, which turned out to be a B-17 Flying Fortress, flying at treetop level. I cannot imagine how huge that was. That must have been absolutely terrifying. When we first realized what it was, the aircraft was actually lower than the summit of Stillman Hill, but about the time it passed over the center, the pilot raised the nose just enough to clear the tops of the maple trees that bracketed the observation building. The tops of those trees were lashing back and forth by the prop wash from those powerful 4 engines, and the noise was deafening. My father was on the phone, unsuccessfully trying to make himself heard above the din. In seconds, the plane vanished in the general direction of Norfolk, and he was able to complete the transmission. I doubt that he had to report that the elevation was very low. I will never forget the belly gunner looking down and laughing as he waved to me from just a few feet above those maples." So very exciting for those folks when they saw that plane coming toward them. So let's see here. Okay, so then only one time, according to the research I found, and I'm not sure how accurate this is, but according to one website that I found, it says only one time during the course of the war did a German aircraft fly into American airspace, and that was near the end of the war when an Army Air Force crew flew a captured German plane to Florida. Of course, the military knew about it, but the civilian observers were kept in the dark to test their proficiency. Before the plane crossed from water to land, a spotter sent in an emergency message, not only identifying it as a German aircraft, but also the correct make and model. So folks were doing a great job in learning about the different aircraft. So that's how folks handled plane spotting during World War II. And my dad talks a little bit about doing that. He was a young boy. He was in elementary school age or so during the war. But he talks about his dad doing plane spotting and he helping his dad as well. So even 75 years later, he still remembers that, and he remembers the cards in the airplane spotter book. So here's my set of cards, and here's my new Warplane Spotters Manual Part A. Caught that off eBay. It was very fun. So hope to be here next week, same time, 6:45, and I hope you'll join me. And I've got a very exciting announcement. I have a new book coming out October the 15th. I'll be putting out information on my Facebook page as well as through my newsletter and on my website. So I hope you'll keep attention to that. If you're interested, stop by and see me. It's www.lindashentonmatchett.com. And I hope you have a great week. Thanks.